All right, we are live streaming now. So, Yangbo, welcome to Superior.
Hello, thank you very much,
So,
Chris.
yeah, man, for those of you who don't know, Yangbo and I, we met online, so we're seeing each other for the first time in 3D here.
Yes, exactly.
Right? So, you're one of the hosts for Regeneration Pollination.
Yeah.
It's a speed networking event that takes place for people all around the globe to get together and meet each other. They have like quick 7-minute little increments where they get to talk with one another, and it's through a number of those events that we've spoken. And then after hours, we talked a bunch. You got to meet Miracle and some other people at our community. And it's through that we got to become friends. And then you said, hey, I'm going to be in Arizona. So
Yeah.
Here we are, right?
Exactly.
So what we thought we'd do is just give you the floor and give you the board so you can share what it is that you've got going on. You know, you represent a company and have a lot of different things that could be possible with the technologies that you have access to and that you're aware of.
Yeah.
So we just like to hear about that. And then hopefully by the end of that, we'll all be thinking, oh, you need to talk to this person. You need to talk to that person. We need to have this kind of conversation. So the floor is yours to introduce yourself and to introduce the things that you're working on, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Excellent. Thank you again, Chris.
Yeah.
And, just for some brief background, everyone, my focus I've been working on for almost 18 years now, actually 18 years almost exactly now if you go back to maybe 2005. Used to spend 6 years of research in energy environmental policy, so biofuels, nuclear, renewables, wide range of various topics, and most of the 2010s was spent on my end co-founding startups one after another in a wide range of sectors. And currently, since the last couple of years, I've been steadily shifting focus towards the impact on that side of things, so means of implementation, given that if you consider how much it's going to take to achieve all of the sustainable development goals, well, $90 trillion US, and how much financial wealth there is in the world, 400 trillion roughly, give or take, basically means that it's not an issue of not having the resources. It's more about, do we have the project pipelines in place, and hence why I've been focusing increasingly on project preparation, facilitation. And most recently, and I'd say it's a godsend when the pandemic hit, because literally could not have been brought on board anywhere else, to be brutally honest, is a group called Innovo Net Zero. And what we do is we're effectively an independent systems integrator that enables companies to achieve net zero carbon profitably. So here, if we just dive in a little bit, so at the top, this is the name of the company, Innovo Net Zero Limited. We're natively remote. We are based in the UK, that's where we had offices, but people around the world. We have members of the team ranging from Seattle all the way to Sydney, Australia. So right there we've got 18 time zones, say. So focus is on 3 different themes. So let's start with the first one. This is the most systemically important. So what we have is sustainable procurement. And for those not familiar, procurement is just buying any goods, services, any type of contracts on behalf of any organization. So the reason we focus on this is that, we have 80% CO2 emissions are scope 3. And what this means is that these emissions are generated not by your organization proper, but by your suppliers, by your customers, or anything indirect. So on average, say, unless of course you are one of the few companies in the world that have your own mines, have your own power plants and such, chances are that 80% of all your CO2 emissions are not actually under your direct control. So what we then do is we enable you to refer suppliers, and then what you get is audited, carbon reductions. So you can think about it this way, that you refer your suppliers in, and then when your suppliers reduce their emissions, your emissions also go down because it's scope 3. So by definition, that what you would have is, so if you were to take a chart here, so let's say here's your organization. So for example, we have scope 1, that's your organization proper. And then here we have what we call scope 2. Still control those, but they're off-site emissions. So for example, if you buy electricity from a power generator, then that's scope 2. Like you're still emitting, but off-site. And then what you have is scope 3, and that's your whole supply chain. And what you then have here is by engaging your suppliers to cut their emissions, because now you are buying products and services from suppliers with lower emissions, then what happens is you have here, if you have your suppliers, and then here is your company, and then to your customers. Yep, and then you have flows of all the carbon reductions down your supply chain as your suppliers reduce emissions. So then we move to the next component, which is now, let's say your suppliers are cutting their emissions, you're cutting your emissions, now you have all the carbon reductions you can pass down. So then we have our second pillar, which is sustainable sales. Yep, and in this case, of course, self-financed. So there is no upfront charge whatsoever to a benefit if you're the buyer. And now we get into sustainable sales. So what we then enable you to do is basically you can sell with ACRs. And then what this means is that 5,000 plus, we call them blue chip companies, signed to the science-based targets, or just for short, SBTI, the Science-Based Targets Initiative. So all of these companies with 7 trillion plus US dollars spend, which is close to 10% of global spend if you tally up all the consumption as part of global GDP. So all of these customers, these prospects, would expect their suppliers to also pledge to reduce carbon emissions to get to zero carbon. So to be able to sell to those, what we then do is we actually then have, so for example, let's say this is your company, and here is your customer. So we would embed, so basically, so net zero, so we have a profitable net zero business development as a service. So in this case, we'd embed a team with your marketing and sales team so that they can get you into the profitable net zero procurement, get you to the embedded procurement teams at your customer level. So what we then do is pre-qualify these customers. So we would then, because normally what it would take is, if you want to get into one of those blue chips, it's going to take you over $1 million a year worth of overhead. What we can do with it as Innovo is we can then embed those, we call them corporate entrepreneurs, within your company at only a fraction, like no more than 10% or a quarter of the total cost otherwise. And we can do that because they don't get, just like every one of us, myself included with Innovo, we don't get any remuneration until whatever venture we're working on is generating cash or revenues. So here, basically think of this as your global market entry. Yeah, because we want you to be able to scale once you're able to sell with all the carbon reductions. And now the third component is, let's say we have, of course, there are quite a number of different ways you can reduce your emissions already. However, what we also do is we have a portfolio, still growing, of profitable clean technologies. And then where these would go is that they would include, they can pretty much be any type of clean tech we vetted as both profitable and ready for deployment. However, let's emphasize some of the flagship technologies. So for one, we have basically turning zero, basically, for example, converting CO2 emissions into things like fertilizer, like animal feed, and then anything. So using algae, so using algal bioreactors to do that. And then what this does is you go from fossil carbon, what you're turning is fossil carbon, to soil carbon, effectively. That's namely with the fertilizer. But what you now have is a circular carbon economy. So instead of treating carbon as a waste product, what is the value of carbon? That's what can be used for. So for example, even if you take coal, for instance, you don't need the carbon to produce energy from coal. All you need is hydrogen. If you can separate the carbon so you use it for other things like graphite or graphene or other products, then of course you get zero emissions right there, obviously. Then what we'd also do is you've got CO2 emissions, and then we also have zero waste as well. That's another one of our flagships. So in this case, what we would then do is turn any type of waste. So for example, let's say if you have any type of, say, anything that would otherwise go to landfills, for instance, you can then mine landfills, say, for example, so you can turn anything from a landfill into useful products. Just anything other than radioactive or explosive refuse, this can be handled. So what this then avoids is, what you can avoid is then, once it's end of life, you don't need incineration there, nor do you need any route to a landfill. But what you would then have is here, what you would then have is a 100% recycling facility. And then once it's at end of life, what you can do is, no downcycling. That, because it breaks down the products into molecular and atomic components, like for example, commingled plastics waste, that's very difficult to recycle, break it down to its atomic components. And in that way, any product can be as good, any recycled product can be as good as anything made from virgin materials. And then, so these are two main flagships currently. Both of them are of interest to a number of large companies we've engaged, including 20 billion petrochemicals multinational, that are seeking to be the first company, not just in their industry, but first company period, to get to zero emission across their whole supply chain. And then a few others are to follow. And then we have other profitable clean tech around things like reforestation. Like we have a stack that enhances tree growth, so stimulates a tree to develop a fibrous root, so absorbs nutrients and water more efficiently, double the survival rate, double the growth rate, you get 4 times the CO2 sequestration as you reforest. So effectively, if you take all of these together, so what we are currently doing, so if you take all of this as one whole, what we have in the making are country level, profitable, net zero partnerships. So for all of these, so right now, the first one that went off the ground is India partnership. 600 million tons of CO2 annually to be converted by 2030. And that's 1.5% of global CO2 emissions. Yeah, and 22 industrial conglomerates. So that is a whole host of companies into which we are deploying all this profitable clean tech, especially. And then the next one we have in line, of course, it's the one that I lead personally here for the United States. So right now, yep, it's multi-sectoral. Public and private. So we work with municipalities as well as corporates and others. But where it's especially becoming relevant is how different technology stack together. So stacking profitable clean tech. So for example, if you can turn, for example, refuse into things like graphite or graphene, sustainable aviation fuel, hydrogen, and whatnot. And then for all of this, and then this you can think of as all of these as feedstock. Yeah, so for example, for clean industry, basically. And we do, in fact, intend to seek opportunities to pursue collaborations with various U.S. Government entities, ranging from municipalities all the way to the federal government, around both the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. And for those who might not be aware, note that these two put together is the largest disbursement of federal investment since the 1930s to date. So keep that in mind, that this is very much indeed an opportunity for you if you're working in the space, especially, or even just want to get into clean tech, climate resilience, and adjacent areas. And then we also have additional countries as well. We have UK, we have EU, Brazil possibly, also China, because they emit more than a third of global CO2 emissions at the moment. But right now, the focus here on is, and specifically with Arizona, is that, for example, if you take the various sectors within the U.S. here, if you take all of that, you have, of course, mining and minerals is a big one. You have petrochemicals is another big one. Also, others include just general infrastructure, as well as ag and forest. So basically, you name just any sector here, but specifically with Arizona, the focus is going to be heavily on the mining and metal sector, since the opportunity here is that if we're able to make extractive industries circular otherwise, say whether it's materials, but especially circular carbon economy, if we're able to make that circular, then what it's going to do is it will then enable unstranding of assets that would otherwise be stranded, that places that are dependent on natural resources, they're not being forced off a cliff, but rather they now have a lot more time they can use to transition in a way that is going to be a lot more equitable, instead of trying to transition so abruptly that those who are least responsible for the predicament we're currently in end up paying the brunt of the costs of a transition. So pretty much here, I think I mostly covered most components of Innovo here, but really, if we have some additional minutes, any questions you'd like to field?
So I would, but I'm noticing that it is exactly 1 o'clock and we both have calls. So maybe what we'll do is after our calls, we can do a part 2 where I have some questions for you.
Perfect.
And then we can go into it from there.
Excellent.
Awesome. Thank you, Youngbo. This is really informative and I can't wait for part 2.
Definitely. Great.